We should be live in a second here. Okay. Okay, so this is our review session for Module 1, and I got a few different questions in the forums on D2L. You should feel free, if you're watching live, to just throw out a question at any time. I'll finish whatever question I'm talking about and then get to the live questions right away, because I understand that some people maybe could only show up to the live session for a short period of time. Okay, so until we have any questions from the chat, I'll just be going through the D2L questions. Alright, so question 1, coming from Jason, says, hey Matt, just wanted to know, and I'm sure other students would like to know this as well, will there be a posted study guide for each test highlighting important topics/details, or should we just generally study every reading assuming there will be a relatively even distribution of questions regarding each? I won't be posting a study guide for each test, or probably for any test. Rather, you should do, as Jason suggests here, study all of the readings, watch all of my lectures, and you can assume that there will be a relatively even distribution of questions from each. So you should spend about as much time on each of them. Depending, of course, on length. Some may be more difficult, may be longer, and those you should spend more time on, just so that you have a equal understanding of them. So I guess I wouldn't say spend as much time, but have an equal understanding of the main arguments in each, what each of the different readings is trying to get across, who they're responding to, what sort of issues they're tackling. So none of the questions are going to be like real specific little nitpicky detail kind of questions. They're all going to be questions about big ideas in the reading, where if you understand the main topic, the main arguments, you're going to be able to do well on the exams. Now, you'll want more depth than just the sort of surface level stuff, because the essay questions are going to ask you to go in greater depth. But at least for the multiple choice questions, knowing the broad ideas, the big ideas of each reading is going to be sufficient. So when you're reviewing, you'll want to ask yourself, for each of the readings, do I understand what the author is arguing? Do I understand what they're arguing about? Do I understand what sort of positions they're responding to? Right? Those are the sort of questions you'll want to have in mind. Okay, before I go on to the next one, I just want to mention again, feel free, if you're in the chat, to ask a question at any time. I'll be happy to take those. I'm just going to take ones from D2L until I get questions from the chat. Okay, so our next question from D2L comes from Megan, and she says, hello Matt, we have read a lot of different pieces so far, and I was wondering what we should focus on from each reading. Are there specific concepts or parts of each reading that we need to understand, or should we know the whole reading in general? Okay, so there's a second part of this question, but I'll just start with that. So this is largely what I was talking about just a moment ago. You you should definitely know what the main idea of each reading is, the main arguments that the author is making throughout the piece. You should know that for sure. You should know what position they're taking and the arguments they have for it. Now, I would also say, I guess, that you should know the whole reading in general, more than that there are specific concepts or parts. I would say that some of the readings are talking about issues that aren't central to the broader discussion we're having in the class as part of this module. So this module is about our duty to obey the law and the legitimate ways that we can resist laws, if there are any. So if there are things in the readings which aren't really related to that, then you can expect that they're not really going to show up on the exam. So Martin Luther King Jr., for instance, has a lot of discussion of the particulars of the reasons that he's in Birmingham. He's got discussion of how white moderates have hurt the cause of desegregation and civil rights. Those sort of issues are not going to be on the exam. They're not really relevant to what we're talking about. We read that piece for his discussion of civil disobedience, legitimate resistance to the law. We didn't read it to find out the details of his particular actions which led up to him being put in jail. Likewise, in Locke, you're not going to have to know things about his analysis of what causes governments to turn to tyranny or any of the... You should know what tyranny is on Locke's account, but you don't need to know like what he thinks the deep causes, historical causes of that are. I'm sure that there are other examples in Plato and Smith, but they don't come to mind right away as those, because those are more recent things that we read. Yeah, so I would say focus on things that are core to the questions that we're looking at in the class, which again are our duties to obey the law and our the legitimate ways that we can resist the law, and in what sort of circumstances it's legitimate to resist. Okay, so for the second part of this question asks, how will the exams be structured in the sense of what type of questions you will be asking? She says she remembers on the first video I said that there may be short answer, and I'm thinking about an hour of time for the exam. Right, okay. So there will be two sorts of questions on the exam. It's going to be split into two sections. The first section is going to be multiple choice, multiple select, true-false kind of questions. And there's generally going to be between like 12 and 20 of those on any given exam. I think this one is going to have 16. And they will be standard sort of questions where you're asked to select the best answer from among the ones that are given to answer the question, or in the multiple select cases, you'll be selecting all of the correct answers, right? And I'll have some reminders in the exam itself that will, tell you the exact format of what's going on. Multiple select ones will always say on them, choose all that apply, or something like that. And it'll be flagged very well for you. There's also going to be one essay question that you're required to write in the exam. I'll give you two essay questions to choose from, and you can pick whichever one you want to write about and spend your time writing about that, and leave the other one completely blank. You don't need to write anything at all in the one that you're not choosing to write about. The exam in total, you'll have 1 hour to complete it. I wouldn't suggest splitting your time evenly, 30 minutes between the multiple choice and the essay. I think it should take you much less than 30 minutes to complete the multiple choice section. That section, I would imagine you can finish in under 20 minutes, pretty easily. If you know the material well, you should be able to. The remainder of your time you should spend writing the essay. The essay, there's not a minimum or maximum length exactly, but you should write as long as it takes to answer the question fully and give a good argument. What I'm going to be looking for in the essay is how solid your argument is and how well you're answering the question. I'm not going to be persnickety about grammar or spelling. You should try to do well on that, but don't spend too much time trying to make those sorts of edits. Be clear in your writing, right? So to the extent that spelling and grammar is essential for clarity, you should do it well, but the main things are be clear, make a good argument, answer the question, right? Those are the things that I'm going to be looking for in your essay. And however long it takes you to do that is how long you should spend on it. And taking into account that you probably will only have between 35 and 45 minutes to write it. I understand that. I'm not going to be grading it as though you had a week to work on this, right? So I'll take account of the fact that you're limited in time. But you should think of it as something where you do really need to engage deeply with the readings and questions that we've discussed in the class. This isn't something where you can give a couple sentences to answer it. It's going to be several paragraphs at the very least. Again, I mean, there's no precise minimum. Okay. Alright, so I think that answers Megan's question here. So don't worry too much. I should just add, because Megan mentioned this as well, don't worry too much about feeling rushed. Just have a good idea of, if you understand the readings and you've thought about them on a philosophical level, you'll be fine. You'll be able to answer the essay questions, at least one of them, without too much trouble in the time that you're given. Okay, so a question from the chat here. Elaine asks, does Socrates believe we have a moral and social duty to obey the law? I would say it certainly seems like he does in Credo. He argues that we have, at the very least, a moral duty. I'm not sure about the social duty aspect of it, but from a moral point of view, he thinks the law, he gives two sorts of arguments. So he gives a gratitude sort of argument where he says, using the language from Smith, he gives a gratitude sort of argument where he says, look, because the state and the laws have provided so many important things in my life, have even given me life in the first place, right? He mentions that part of the reason he's alive at all is because of the laws, and because they contributed to his education, contributed to who he is today. He has this obligation to obey their commands just as he would the commands of his father, the commands of his master. For that reason, he thinks that we have a moral duty to obey the law. He also argues that he has tacitly or implicitly consented to obey the law by living in Athens. He mentions that Athens permits anyone to any adult to leave at any time, and they can take all of their possessions with them. There's no penalty. They're perfectly free to leave, and so he says, by continuing to stay there, continuing to get the benefits of living under Athenian law, he has consented in a way to obey the law, and so has a moral duty to do it. Is that a sufficient answer, or? I'll wait for a second. Okay. I'll assume that answers your question, but if you want to follow up any more on that, feel free to jump in, and anyone else can jump in with any questions they have at any time. For now, I'll go back to D2L. Elaine has the next question here. She says, I believe you said in your lecture today to focus on parallels between different readings, if not parallels, then contrasts between their arguments, for example, violence versus nonviolence. Right, yeah, so the multiple, this will explain a little bit more about the format of the exam. The multiple choice questions are primarily going to be focused, each question will be focused on a single author's ideas. So questions will be just about what Socrates said, or just about what Smith said, or just about what Martin Luther King Jr. said, or just about what Locke said. The essay questions, in contrast, are going to ask you to integrate multiple readings into your answer. So they might ask about the different views on violent and nonviolent resistance to the law. They might ask about different views on duties to obey the law. They might ask about different views on the gratitude argument or utilitarian arguments. So yeah, the essay questions are going to be asking you to talk about multiple readings in your answer, to bring multiple ones in, to make your own argument, but also consider the arguments that were made by the authors throughout the module. So they're a bit more comprehensive than the multiple choice questions, which are more focused on particular questions within each reading. Okay. So the last question from D2L is from Anna, and she asks, she's wondering what the exact time window for exam 1 will be. The time window is going to be, I will put up the exam within an hour of the completion of this little review. So probably you can expect it by around 2 p.m. today. And it will be open for you to start taking until 11:30 p.m. on Monday, on the coming Monday. So that's July the 18th, right? So you can start it at any time during that time. Once you start it, though, you'll have 1 hour to complete it, okay? So don't start it until you're ready. Feel free to take a few days to review, take some time to look over the readings again, to look over my lectures again. You can feel free to email me with any questions, although I do mention again that expect that it's possible it'll take up to 24 hours to return your message, but feel free to ask me any questions or post any on D2L. I'll be checking it regularly. But yeah, you have until basically the end of Monday to begin the exam, and then you'll have 1 hour once you do begin the exam. Okay, so back to the chat. Elaine asks, what about their beliefs in terms of social context? I'm not... so maybe, Elaine, you could say a little bit more about what you mean by that. Do you mean in terms of, am I going to be asking about... am I going to be asking you to contextualize the views of the people that we've read in their social context. I won't be asking you to do anything like that, so you can, in some sense, you can assume that all of these authors were writing in the same social context as far as I can't think of cases where I'm going to be asking you to distinguish the social context of Locke and Socrates. Yeah, I mean, we just haven't really discussed those sort of things in the class, and I think it would be unfair of me to ask you, to compare and contrast the societies of 17th century England and ancient Greece. So if that's what you mean, then you won't need to be concerned with the social context of any of these authors' beliefs. Right, okay, yeah. So, Elaine says that MLK was very focused on just laws and the right to vote. That's true. I think that that sort of concern can be read into all of the authors, even though John Locke is writing in a context where monarchies are much more common than representative democracies. Certainly the arguments that MLK brings to bear are relevant to John Locke still. So you might consider whether the principles that John Locke sets out in his in two treatises on government would be changed at all if there was a democracy as opposed to a monarchy, or if there was any different sort of social situation as opposed to the one he was actually in. So yeah, when you're especially when you're doing the essay, you could consider questions like that, like, does Locke's do Locke's principles change at all in a democratic society? How might we think about how democracy would significantly change what Locke argues? So you could consider questions like that. I don't think I'm writing any questions which require that you consider that. I am writing some questions that ask about particular contexts, like if we're living in a democracy, is it legitimate to disobey the laws, right? I might ask a question like that, or I would say, according to Smith, in a democracy, do we have a duty to obey the laws? I might ask a question like that, but I won't have a question of the sort, what does Locke think about democracy, or something like that. It's going to be very focused to the things that we've read. I don't know. I'm still unclear if I've fully answered your question or not. It's a little difficult for me to get a full grasp without being able to quickly converse. And again, I've run out of questions on D2L, so... okay, so Elaine follows up here. I think this is clear from my point of view anyway. I was wondering if you were going to ask questions about their society's relevance upon their writings. Yeah, so no, I won't be doing that. There'll be no questions that are specifically asking you to recall any details about the society of any of the authors. So yeah, that won't come up in the exam because it's not something that we've talked about, not something that we've read about. So it wouldn't be fair to ask you to recall any of that or to know any of that. If anyone else has questions, or if Elaine, you have more questions, I'll wait a couple more minutes, and if there aren't any more, I will end it here. And again, you can all feel free to email me with any questions that you have, and I will be happy to respond. You could also post them on D2L, and I'll be happy to respond there as well. And I'm happy to continue this as long as there are questions, but I'm just not seeing anything. Yeah, okay, so Lane points out, I think what you're asking is more about general arguments from each. That's right, yeah. So all the questions I'm asking are about the general arguments that they're making, just the sort of things that you could gain from reading the material itself. You wouldn't have to do any outside reading to do well on this exam. And you won't have to be an expert on the readings either. If you have a firm grasp of each of the author's positions and their reasons for those positions, who they're responding to, what they're talking about, you're gonna do well. The exam isn't going to be asking any more than that. Okay. All right, then. Thanks. One more time, if any of you have any questions that weren't answered here, feel free to send me an email, post on the D2L forums. I'll try to respond to you as soon as I can. And good luck on the exam.